You might already know that inflation kicked off this year's campaign with a bang as consumer prices soared 7%. Yes, the highest increase since 1982. This is generally good for you as a real estate investor, like we talk about here all the time, but of course it's bad for consumers, and I'm going to tell you why it's probably going to get a little bit worse, and also why you and your next door neighbor actually pay different inflation rates. Hi, I'm Keith Weinhold. This is Get Rich Education. So the biggest culprits for this higher inflation, 7% now, really are shelter costs, especially rent, and used car prices. In fact, shelter costs jumped at their highest rate in 15 years. And used cars, which have kind of become the poster child for the current inflationary environment, increased 37% year over year. Gasoline prices up 50% just since December 2020. These hit everyday people, everybody. And while a lot of Americans got a raise in the last year, it's not keeping up proportionally to inflation. In fact, real average hourly earnings, when you adjust them for inflation, actually fell 2.4% in December from a year earlier. Hey, go ahead and put a like on this if you want. And you know, there's no shortage of likes in the world, just like there's no shortage of dollars in the world, apparently. We're not going to run out of either one. You're not going to run out of likes if you put a like on this video. That helps me out. Really appreciate it. So what can be done? Well, we know early this year the Fed is winding down their stimulus measures, and how many interest rate hikes are they going to make to get on top of this inflation? Goldman Sachs thinks 4, a lot of people think 3 or 4/4% hikes. The Fed funds rate is basically 0 now. If we got 4/4 point hikes, it would be 1%, maybe 1.5% if some of those hikes are bigger. One needs to understand that the Fed funds rate, just say a half-point increase in those, that doesn't directly translate to a half-point increase in mortgage interest rates, but they're indirectly correlated. The Fed funds rate is going to have some impact on mortgage rates. But the point is that higher costs of interest, raising these borrowing costs, that affects people like you, and that affects businesses as well, slowing down demand. Let me just ask you, I mean, if mortgage interest rates were 3% and they got hiked up to 15%, just to use an extreme example, all right, well, you're a lot less likely to want to originate a mortgage or even get a car loan or anything like that. So what this does is it slows demand, and that's how it slows inflation. And you got to remember on the other side of it too, when you increase interest rates, that incentivizes people to save. And right now, like with this thing I got in the mail for some sort of Discover savings account, and a 0.4% interest rate is what you can get currently with interest rates at rock bottom lows. I mean, what fraction of inflation is that? That's like only 5% of the inflation amount. That's ridiculous. So incentivizing saving helps to slow down price increases. The other things that can be done are the Biden administration, they have launched this antitrust crusade to try to somewhat break up some of these bigger businesses. And if you have more smaller businesses, you have more competition. And when you have more businesses trying to outcompete each other, they will often try to compete on price and lower prices. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce has argued for more immigration to help ease labor shortages. But COVID supply chain bottlenecks continue to be a problem, and the bottlenecks could get even worse in limiting the amount of supplies. Fewer supplies and more dollars chasing them, of course, is a recipe for inflation. I mean, you've got manufacturing powerhouse China increasingly shutting down more businesses and more factories, and they've now locked down 20 million people across 3 cities in China to try to prevent an Omicron outbreak, so factories could very well be forced offline again in China. Now understand that in society, oftentimes we have inflation and deflation at the same time. I talked about some of the things that we've seen price inflation on, but we can have deflation oftentimes in things like electronics, like mobile phones, and especially televisions over time. There is it almost every time, both inflation and deflation at the same time. But yeah, if you blend them all together, we sure are in an inflationary environment right now. Now, everyone pays a different inflation rate. If you live in the United States like I do, you and I pay a different inflation rate. Maybe we live in different towns, but you know what? You and your next door neighbor actually pay different inflation rates. Why? Because you live different lives. Say that your neighbor is a long-haul commuter and you're not. Well, price increases in gasoline affect them more than it's going to affect you. Or say that they are a vegetarian and you're not. All right, well then price increases in beef are going to affect you if you eat beef and the vegetarian does not. So that's why everyone pays a different inflation rate, even you and your next door neighbor. Well, hey, go ahead and put a like here if you think you learned a little something as we're talking about inflation hitting 7%, a new record in this generation. Of course, we know as real estate investors, if you've been following me, we actually benefit from inflation with a term that I coined, the inflation triple crown, because you benefit with price inflation of your asset, you benefit by debt debasement, and you benefit with cash flow enhancement from your tenants. Since your biggest expense, your mortgage principal and interest, is fixed, you really owe it to yourself to learn about the inflation triple crown. I mean, we're talking about what the Fed is doing and the actions they're taking, but the actions that you can take are really profound in your life. I'll put that video playlist right up here. It's 3 videos, one for each of the 3 legs of the inflation triple crown. That's really going to help you out and make a difference in your life where you can actually profit from inflation. I'm Keith Weinhold. Thanks for being here, but you weren't here for me. You were here for you. We'll see you in the next video.